What if everything you thought you knew about where true learning began was just the tip of the iceberg? What if the centers of genius that shaped our modern world, from roughly the 8th to the 14th centuries, are not the ones you first think of? Are you ready to dive deep into the forgotten intellectual powerhouses that glowed with innovation while much of Europe slumbered? Number 8. Qayrawan, the cradle of North African scholarship. The city of Qayrawan, nestled in what is modern-day Tunisia, was not merely a military outpost when it was established in the 7th century. It swiftly transformed into a pulsating heart of Islamic scholarship, a vibrant metropolis that radiated knowledge across North Africa and beyond. Its strategic position made it a crossroads for trade routes and, crucially, for ideas. The Great Mosque of Uqba, founded around 670 CE, was not just a place of worship. It was a colossal university long before the term was even coined in Europe. This magnificent structure, with its soaring minaret and vast prayer halls, buzzed with intellectual activity every single day. Scholars from across the Islamic world flocked to its spiritual and academic embrace. The curriculum at the Great Mosque was incredibly broad for its time, specialized in Islamic law, particularly the Maliki school of thought, which remains dominant in North Africa to this day. Students would gather around pillars listening intently as renowned jurists delivered lectures, debated intricate legal points, and offered guidance. But law was only one facet of Qayrawan's intellectual diamond. Medicine flourished here too. The city was home to brilliant physicians and hospitals that were far more advanced than anything seen in the West for centuries. One towering figure was Abu Ja'far Ahmad ibn Ibrahim ibn Abi Khalid al-Jazar, commonly known simply as Ibn al-Jazar. Born in Qayrawan in the 9th century, he became one of the most celebrated physicians of his era. His ground-draining medical treatise, Kitab Zad al-Musafir, Waqut al-Hadar, or Provision for the Traveler and Nourishment for the Settler, was a comprehensive medical encyclopedia. This work meticulously detailed diseases from head to toe, their symptoms, diagnoses, and effective treatments. It was so influential that it was translated into Latin as Viaticum and continued to be a foundational medical text across Europe for centuries, guiding doctors and shaping medical practices. Imagine a single book from Qayrawan influencing medical knowledge for half a millennium. Beyond medicine and law, Qayrawan excelled in theology, Arabic language and grammar, history and astronomy. Scholars like Asad ibn al-Furat, a brilliant jurist and theologian from the late 8th and early 9th centuries, exemplified the intellectual rigor of the city. He was instrumental in codifying the Maliki school of law, drawing upon his extensive travels and studies in Baghdad and Medina. His debates and writings shaped the legal landscape of North Africa for generations. The city's libraries, though not as famously massive as those in Baghdad or Cordoba, were rich repositories of knowledge. Scholars amassed personal collections, and the mosque itself maintained a respectable library for its students and teachers. These collections contained manuscripts on every conceivable subject, from the works of ancient Greek philosophers translated into Arabic to original commentaries on the Quran and groundbreaking scientific treatises. The process of copying and illuminating these manuscripts was an industry in itself, employing scribes and artists who ensured the preservation and dissemination of knowledge. Qayrawan also served as a crucial bridge for intellectual exchange between the eastern and western parts of the Islamic world. Ideas, texts, and scholars would travel from Baghdad and Damascus, pausing in Qayrawan before continuing their journey across North Africa to Al-Andalus. This constant flow kept Qayrawan intellectually vibrant and fresh, absorbing new concepts and contributing its own unique insights. The city's prosperity, fueled by trade and a stable political environment for much of its early history, provided the necessary support for scholars to pursue their intellectual passions without constant worry. Patrons, including local rulers and wealthy merchants, invested in education and scholarship, commissioning translations and supporting the livelihoods of learned individuals. This dedication to learning was not merely academic. It was woven into the very fabric of society. So why is Qayrawan often overlooked in the grand narrative of the Islamic Golden Age? Perhaps its intellectual dominance was eventually overshadowed by later, larger empires and their flashier capitals like Cairo and Cordoba. Political shifts and periods of instability also played a part in its relative decline as a singular intellectual hub. Yet, its profound contributions to Islamic jurisprudence, especially the Maliki school, its pioneering medical advancements, and its role as a key intellectual node in early Islamic history are undeniable. Qayrawan laid much of the foundational groundwork for the intellectual flowering that would follow elsewhere, a silent but powerful force in shaping the intellectual landscape of the medieval world. It was a place where learning was truly revered, where the pursuit of knowledge was a collective endeavor that left an indelible mark on history. The echoes of its scholarly past still resonate in the dusty streets and ancient stones of this remarkable city, a reminder of a time when it truly was the cradle of North African thought. Number 7. Toledo, where worlds met through words. Imagine a city where the very act of speaking and understanding each other's words transcended political and religious divides, creating a bridge of knowledge that transformed continents. That city was Toledo, in what is now Spain. And its legacy is not just about the beauty of its architecture, but the profundity of its intellectual exchange. During the Islamic Golden Age, Al-Andalus, the Muslim-ruled Iberian Peninsula, shone as a beacon of scholarship. While Cordoba often takes the spotlight, Toledo played an equally vital though distinct role, especially after its reconquest by Christian forces in 1085. It became the most important conduit through which Islamic knowledge, and indeed forgotten Greek and Roman texts preserved by Islamic scholars, flowed into Latin Europe. This was all thanks to the incredible, tireless work of its famous translation school. Toledo's unique position as a major city in Al-Andalus that transitioned to Christian rule made it a natural meeting point. Many Muslims and Jews continued to live in the city, retaining their Arabic language and access to vast libraries. Christian scholars from across Europe, eager for the advanced knowledge that had been cultivated in the Islamic world, flocked to Toledo. They sought out texts on philosophy, medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and optics, fields where Islamic scholars had made extraordinary progress, while Europe was grappling with simpler concepts. The Archbishop of Toledo, Raymond de Solvata, recognized this immense opportunity and actively promoted the translation efforts, providing patronage and support for these scholarly endeavors. He understood that unlocking this treasure trove of Arabic knowledge would be a monumental step forward for European intellectual life. Translation school was not a formal institution with fixed classrooms and professors in the modern sense. It was a network of individual scholars, often working collaboratively, translating texts from Arabic into Latin, sometimes using Castilian Spanish as an intermediate step. These were not just quick, superficial translations. They were rigorous, painstaking efforts to accurately convey complex scientific and philosophical ideas. Among the most prolific and influential translators was Gerard of Cremona, an Italian scholar who arrived in Toledo in the 12th century. He is credited with translating over 80 major Arabic works into Latin, a truly astonishing feat. His translations included Al-Khwarizmi's Algebra, Ibn Sina's, Avicenna's Canon of Medicine, Al-Razi's works, and many of Aristotle's treatises that had been lost to the West. He even translated Archimedes on the measurement of the circle from Arabic, a text that was central to mathematical understanding. Gerard of Cremona's contributions were monumental, providing European universities with essential texts that fueled the intellectual awakening of the Renaissance and laid the groundwork for modern science. Another key figure was John of Seville, also known as John of Luna or John Hispalensis. Active in the early 12th century, he translated significant works on astronomy and astrology. His efforts brought the sophisticated astronomical models and observational techniques developed by Islamic scholars to European audiences. Dominicus Gundisalinus, a Spanish philosopher, often collaborated with Arabic-speaking Jewish scholars, translating philosophical texts, particularly those of Ibn Sina and Al-Ghazali, which had a profound impact on scholastic philosophy in Europe. The sheer volume and diversity of the texts translated were astounding. They included not only the scientific and medical works that transformed European thought, but also philosophical treatises that challenged existing paradigms and introduced new modes of logical reasoning. These translated texts became the bedrock of university curricula in Paris, Bologna, and Oxford, inspiring generations of scholars and paving the way for figures like Roger Bacon and Thomas Aquinas. What makes Toledo so captivating is that it was not just a one-way street of knowledge transfer. While the emphasis was on bringing Arabic texts into Latin, the very act of translation fostered a unique intellectual environment. It brought together scholars of different faiths and backgrounds, Christians, Muslims, and Jews, all united by their shared passion for learning. They debated, discussed, and critically analyzed the texts they were translating, often adding their own insights and commentaries. This Plambertus spirit transcended the political tensions of the era, creating pockets of genuine intellectual symbiosis. The translators often worked directly with Arabic speakers, grappling with the nuances of language and complex scientific concepts, demonstrating a profound mutual respect for knowledge. Toledo's legacy is sometimes overshadowed by the more glamorous narratives of scientific discovery or philosophical innovation happening elsewhere. Yet, without the painstaking, often anonymous work of its translators, much of that knowledge would have remained locked away from the burgeoning intellectual centers of Europe. Toledo was the crucial pipeline, the indispensable bridge that connected two vastly different intellectual worlds. It was a city where the magic of understanding, the very essence of learning, was painstakingly crafted, word by word, transforming the intellectual landscape of a continent and setting the stage for the scientific revolution. Its role as a dynamic Mayan hub of knowledge exchange remains a powerful testament to the universal power of intellectual curiosity. Number 6. Nishapur, Persia's lost intellectual jewel. If you were to draw a map of intellectual powerhouses during the Islamic Golden Age, Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba would undoubtedly glow brightly. But what about the brilliant stars that shone in the East, often overshadowed by their Western counterparts? One such star, tragically dimmed by later historical events, was Nishapur. Located in the vast region of Khorasan in northeastern Iran, Nishapur was for centuries a bustling metropolis, a center of commerce, art, and most importantly an intellectual beacon that rivaled any city in the Islamic world. Its vibrancy was a testament to the immense value placed on learning in the Eastern Islamic lands. Nishapur was not home to one grand, centralized institution like Baghdad's House of Wisdom or Cairo's Al-Azhar. Instead, its intellectual prowess lay in its sheer abundance of private and public libraries, its numerous madrasas, colleges for religious and secular studies, and the proliferation of intellectual salons where scholars gathered to debate, discuss, and disseminate knowledge. Chroniclers of the time described Nishapur as a city teeming with books, where public libraries were numerous and accessible, and private collections often contained tens of thousands of volumes. Imagine a city where books were as common as everyday goods, and intellectual curiosity was a driving force of daily life. The madrasas, funded by wealthy patrons and pious endowments, attracted students from across Central Asia and Persia, offering instruction in a wide range of subjects, from Islamic law and theology to philosophy, mathematics, medicine, and astronomy. The city fostered an environment of intense intellectual competition and collaboration, drawing in some of the greatest minds of the era. Among the towering figures associated with Nishapur was Omar Khayyam. While widely celebrated in the West as a poet for his rubaiyat, Khayyam was first and foremost a brilliant mathematician and astronomer, born in Nishapur in the 11th century. His contributions to algebra were revolutionary. He developed methods for solving cubic equations using geometric methods, which were far more sophisticated than anything known at the time. He also made significant contributions to the understanding of parallels and the binomial theorem. Khayyam was also a key figure in the astronomical observatory in Nishapur, where he and his team meticulously observed the heavens. Their work led to the creation of the Halali calendar, an incredibly accurate solar calendar that was even more precise than the Gregorian calendar developed centuries later in Europe. This calendar, named after the Seljuk Sultan Jalal ad-Din Malik Shah, demonstrated a profound understanding of celestial mechanics and a commitment to empirical observation. Another extraordinary scholar from Nishapur was Abu al-Fath Abdalrahman al-Khazini, a physicist and astronomer who lived in the late 11th and early 12th centuries. Al-Khazini was a master of mechanics and hydrostatics. His monumental work, the Book of the Balance of Wisdom, is a treasure trove of scientific knowledge. In it, he discussed the theory of the universal force of gravity acting on a body, the density of liquids, and the specific gravities of various substances. He even described an elaborate hydrostatical balance that was incredibly precise for its time, capable of measuring the weight of an object in both air and water to determine its specific gravity. His work predated European understandings of these concepts by centuries, demonstrating a sophisticated approach to experimental physics. Al-Khazini's detailed observations and theoretical insights made him a pioneer in the field of mechanics, yet his name remains largely unknown outside specialist circles. Nishapur's intellectual fervor was tragically cut short by the devastating Mongol invasions in the 13th century. The city was utterly destroyed, its libraries burned, its scholars massacred or dispersed. This cataclysmic event wiped out not just buildings and lives, but also centuries of accumulated knowledge and intellectual tradition. The sheer scale of destruction meant that many of Nishapur's unique contributions were lost forever or only survived in scattered fragments. This historical catastrophe is a significant reason why Nishapur, despite its incredible intellectual output, is now largely forgotten compared to cities that suffered less extreme fates. However, the legacy of Nishapur's intellectual vitality continues to resonate. It represents the profound depth of scholarship that flourished in the Eastern Islamic lands, a testament to the fact that innovation and learning were not confined to a few dominant centers. The sheer number of scholars, the rich libraries, and the ground-rank scientific and mathematical advancements that emerged from Nishapur speak to a culture that deeply valued intellectual pursuit. It was a city where minds were sharpened, new ideas were forged, and the boundaries of human knowledge were pushed further than ever before, leaving an indelible, though often unsung mark on the history of science and thought. Number 5. Timbuktu, the desert's radiant knowledge hub. When you think of ancient centers of learning, do you picture a city at the edge of a vast desert, thousands of miles from the familiar intellectual hubs of the Middle East and Europe? If not, then you're missing out on the astonishing story of Timbuktu, a city in Mali that became a beacon of scholarship and spiritual insight, a radiant knowledge hub in the heart of West Africa during the Islamic Golden Age. From the 12th century onwards, Timbuktu was not just a crucial trading post for gold, salt, and slaves. It was a flourishing intellectual metropolis that attracted scholars and students from across Africa and beyond. Timbuktu's intellectual heart revolved around three main mosques, which also served as universities: Sankour, Djengueber, and Sidi Yahya. Of these, Sankour University was arguably the most famous and influential. It was not a single campus with classrooms and dormitories like a modern university. Instead, it was a decentralized system where teaching took place in the courtyards of mosques, in private homes, and in the numerous madrasas scattered throughout the city. Scholars often taught in their own homes, and students would move from one teacher to another, specializing in different fields. This flexible, decentralized model fostered a dynamic and personalized learning environment. Curriculum at Timbuktu's universities was incredibly comprehensive, rivaling any in the Islamic world. It encompassed a wide range of subjects: Islamic law, theology, Arabic language and grammar, rhetoric, logic, mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. History was also a very important subject, with scholars meticulously mapping the history of the region and the broader Islamic world. The study of Islamic law was particularly strong, with an emphasis on the Maliki school. Similar to Qayrawan, Timbuktu scholars developed sophisticated interpretations and applications of legal principles that influenced the legal systems across West Africa. They were not merely transmitters of knowledge, but innovators, contributing original thought and commentary to existing disciplines. What truly set Timbuktu apart was its extraordinary collection of manuscripts. The city was a vast repository of written knowledge, with hundreds of thousands of manuscripts accumulated over centuries. These were not just religious texts. They covered every aspect of human knowledge imaginable. There were treatises on astronomy detailing celestial movements and star charts, mathematical texts that explored algebra and geometry, medical works describing surgical procedures and herbal remedies, philosophical essays, Azdades or Modi. These manuscripts, often beautifully illuminated and bound, were not kept in grand public libraries but rather in the private collections of scholarly families passed down through generations. Imagine entire houses dedicated to vast libraries, their shelves groaning under the weight of centuries of accumulated wisdom. One of the most revered scholars of Timbuktu was Ahmad Baba al-Masufi al-Timbukti, who lived from the 16th to the 17th century. He was an incredibly prolific author, jurist, and historian, known for his vast knowledge and sharp intellect. His personal library was said to contain thousands of volumes, and he produced over 40 books, though many have been lost. His writings on Islamic law, history, and grammar were highly respected, and he was consulted by rulers and scholars alike. When the Moroccan army invaded Timbuktu in the late 16th century, Ahmad Baba was exiled to Marrakesh, but his intellectual prowess was so evident that he was treated with respect and allowed to continue his studies and teaching, eventually returning to Timbuktu to continue his work. His life story exemplifies the intellectual resilience and importance of Timbuktu's scholarly tradition. The importance of Timbuktu's scholarship extends beyond the written word. It was also a vibrant center for oral tradition, with griots and storytellers playing a crucial role in preserving history and knowledge. Combination of meticulous written documentation and rich oral histories made Timbuktu a unique and powerful intellectual force. The city's relative isolation deep in the Sahara meant that its intellectual traditions developed with a distinct West African flavor, integrating local customs and knowledge with broader Islamic scholarship. Despite its immense historical and intellectual significance, Timbuktu's contributions are often overlooked in global narratives of the Islamic Golden Age. The logistical challenges of reaching the city, the dispersal of its manuscripts in the face of invasions and climate change, and the historical marginalization of African intellectual history have all contributed to its forgotten status. Yet, Timbuktu stands as a powerful testament to the universal human drive for knowledge and the flourishing of sophisticated intellectual life in places often excluded from traditional historical accounts. It reminds us that genius and enlightenment can bloom in the most unexpected of places, transforming desert towns into beacons of scholarship that radiated wisdom for centuries. Number 4. Fez, the perpetual spring of Moroccan minds. In the winding, labyrinthine streets of Fez, Morocco, lies a treasure that has been silently shaping minds for over a millennium. Often cited as the oldest continually operating university in the world, the University of Al-Qayrawan is more than just a historical landmark. It was and remains a perpetual spring of Moroccan scholarship, a foundational pillar of learning in the Islamic West. But Fez was more than just this famous university. It was an entire city steeped in intellectual life, a vibrant ecosystem of knowledge that cultivated brilliance for centuries. The story of Al-Qayrawan begins not as a university, but as a mosque founded in 859 CE by Fatima al-Fihri, a wealthy and devout woman. From its very inception, the mosque was intended to be a place of both worship and learning. Over time, as its reputation grew and more scholars and students flocked to it, its function expanded. By the 10th century, it had become a leading center for religious instruction and legal debate. By the 12th century, it had transformed into a full-fledged university, offering a comprehensive curriculum that went far beyond theological studies. Its structure, with teaching circles forming around pillars within the Grand Mosque, was a common educational model of the time, allowing for a dynamic and personalized learning experience. The curriculum at Al-Qayrawan was incredibly diverse, reflecting the broad scope of Islamic scholarship. While Islamic law, particularly the Maliki school, and theology remained central, students could also delve into Arabic grammar and rhetoric, logic, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and even music. Imagine a place where, centuries ago, you could study the intricacies of celestial movements right after a deep dive into ancient poetry. The university's library, established in the 14th century, quickly grew into one of the richest in the Islamic world. It housed hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, including precious texts on astronomy, jurisprudence, medicine, and history, many of which were beautifully illuminated and copied by hand. This library was not merely a collection of books. It was a living repository of knowledge, constantly being added to and consulted by scholars from across North Africa and Al-Andalus. Al-Qayrawan attracted some of the greatest intellectual luminaries of the medieval period. The renowned historian and sociologist Ibn Khaldun, whose groundbreaking work Muqaddimah laid the foundations for modern sociology and historiography, studied at Al-Qayrawan in the 14th century. His time there undoubtedly shaped his comprehensive approach to understanding human societies and their development. Another towering figure who spent time in Fez and whose intellectual journey was influenced by its scholarly atmosphere was the Jewish philosopher and physician Moses Maimonides, who lived in the 12th century. Though he did not study at Al-Qayrawan itself as a Jew, his family resided in Fez for a period, and he undoubtedly engaged with the city's intellectual life and its rich libraries, which were accessible to scholars of all faiths. The famous Muslim geographer Al-Idrisi, whose detailed maps and geographical descriptions revolutionized cartography in the 12th century, also spent time in Fez, absorbing its intellectual currents. Beyond the university itself, Fez was a city where intellectual curiosity was woven into daily life. Its vibrant souks, its artisan workshops, and its numerous mosques and madrasas all contributed to an atmosphere conducive to learning. Patrons, including rulers and wealthy merchants, actively supported scholars, built libraries, and endowed madrasas, ensuring a continuous flow of resources into the intellectual sphere. The city was a melting pot of ideas, with scholars and students from diverse backgrounds converging to share knowledge and engage in robust intellectual debates. This constant exchange kept the intellectual tradition of Fes vibrant and adaptable. Despite its incredible longevity and its undeniable impact on Islamic scholarship and beyond, Al-Qayrawan and the broader intellectual legacy of Fes are often less prominent in global historical narratives compared to cities like Baghdad or Cordoba. This is partly due to the historical focus on the Eastern Islamic lands and Al-Andalus. However, Fes's continuous, unbroken tradition of learning makes it uniquely significant. It stands as a powerful testament to the enduring value of education, the unwavering pursuit of knowledge, and the profound impact of a city that transformed itself into a perpetual spring of intellectual inquiry. It was a place where knowledge was not just acquired, but meticulously preserved, passionately debated, and tirelessly expanded, leaving an indelible mark on the history of human thought. Number 3. Cairo, the Fatimids' dazzling capital of thought. When the Fatimid caliphs established their grand new capital of Cairo in the 10th century, they had a clear vision: to create a city that would not only be a political and military powerhouse, but also a dazzling center of intellectual and religious thought, one that would rival the Abbasid capital of Baghdad. And for centuries, Cairo indeed shone brightly, cultivating an unparalleled intellectual environment that left an indelible mark on science, philosophy, and art. While Al-Azhar University is widely recognized today, its origins and the lesser-known Dar al-Hikmah, or House of Wisdom, reveal the true depth of Cairo's early intellectual ambition. Al-Azhar Mosque, founded in 970 CE, quickly grew into a major center of learning, much like Fes's Al-Qayrawan. It became a university in all but name, attracting students from across the Islamic world. Its curriculum was initially focused on Islamic theology, particularly the Shi'i doctrines of the Fatimids, along with law, Arabic language, and literature. However, Al-Azhar eventually broadened its scope to include logic, mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. It amassed a vast library which was open to scholars and students, fostering an environment of deep academic inquiry. While it is certainly not forgotten today, its early multifaceted role as a cutting-edge intellectual institution is often less emphasized than its later religious focus. Truly forgotten intellectual jewel of Fatimid Cairo, however, was the Dar al-Hikmah, or House of Wisdom, established by Caliph al-Hakim bi-Amr Allah in 1004 CE. This institution was a direct challenge to Baghdad's famous Bayt al-Hikmah and was designed to be even grander and more comprehensive. It was not just a library or a translation bureau. It was a sprawling academic complex that included dedicated reading rooms, lecture halls, and laboratories. It boasted an astronomical observatory and rooms for philosophical discussions. The Dar al-Hikmah housed an astronomical observatory on the nearby Al-Muqattam Hills, where scholars like Ibn Yunus, a brilliant astronomer of the late 10th and early 11th centuries, made meticulous observations that led to the creation of precise astronomical tables, later known as the Hakamite tables. These tables were crucial for timekeeping, religious rituals, and navigation, demonstrating Cairo's commitment to empirical scientific research. The library of the Dar al-Hikmah was legendary, said to contain hundreds of thousands of volumes, rivaling or even surpassing other great libraries of the era. It housed works on every conceivable subject, from ancient Greek texts translated into Arabic to original Fatimid scholarship in medicine, optics, mathematics, and astronomy. Access to the library was free and open to scholars and students, and even paper, pens, and ink were provided without charge, demonstrating an extraordinary commitment to the widespread dissemination of knowledge. This was a place where scholars from diverse backgrounds could converge, engage in rigorous intellectual debate, and push the boundaries of human understanding. Cairo was also home to some of the most influential scholars of the Islamic Golden Age. Although he was not a direct employee of Dar al-Hikmah, the brilliant polymath Ibn al-Haytham, often considered the father of optics, spent a significant portion of his life in Cairo in the 11th century. His monumental work, Kitab al-Manazir, or Book of Optics, revolutionized the understanding of light and vision. He was the first to explain vision as the result of light rays entering the eye rather than rays emanating from it. His rigorous experimental methods, his use of controlled experiments, and his emphasis on empirical evidence laid the groundwork for the modern scientific method. His work was studied and admired for centuries, influencing European thinkers like Roger Bacon and Johannes Kepler. The intellectual environment of Cairo, with its advanced observatories and rich libraries, undoubtedly provided the resources and intellectual stimulation necessary for such groundbreaking research. Unfortunately, the Dar al-Hikmah, unlike al-Azhar, did not endure. It eventually declined with the fall of the Fatimid dynasty in the 12th century. Its library dispersed and its operations ceased. This significant institution, once a beacon of scientific and philosophical inquiry, faded into obscurity, overshadowed by the continuous presence of Al-Azhar and the grand narratives of other centers. However, Cairo's Fatimid period represents a remarkable era of intellectual audacity and scientific advancement. It was a city that deliberately cultivated a culture of knowledge, investing heavily in institutions that pushed the frontiers of science, philosophy, and learning. The legacy of Cairo's intellectual glory from this era, particularly the forgotten brilliance of its Dar al-Hikmah, reminds us of a period when the city was not just a political capital, but a dazzling engine of human inquiry, a place where ideas were debated, discoveries were made, and the light of knowledge shone brightly across the medieval world. Number 2. Cordoba, Andalus's luminary of enlightenment. When the history books speak of Al-Andalus, the Muslim-ruled Iberian Peninsula, one city always stands out like a shining star: Cordoba. It was not just a city, it was an entire civilization, a luminary of enlightenment that for centuries embodied the pinnacle of intellectual achievement, cultural sophistication, and religious tolerance in medieval Europe. While its architectural marvels, particularly the Great Mosque, are well known, the true extent of its intellectual effervescence and its vast network of learning often remains understated, a forgotten symphony of scholarly pursuit. By the 10th century, Cordoba was arguably the largest and most prosperous city in Europe, a glittering metropolis of 1 million inhabitants at a time when London was still a village. Its streets were paved and lit at night, a stark contrast to the muddy, dark lanes of most European capitals. It boasted public baths, running water, and sophisticated urban planning, all of which contributed to a high quality of life that fostered intellectual pursuits. Education was highly valued at every level of society. Both boys and girls were encouraged to learn, and literacy rates were remarkably high. This ideal commitment to learning laid the groundwork for Cordoba's intellectual supremacy. The heart of Cordoba's intellectual life was its astonishing libraries. It was said that some private citizens owned libraries with thousands of books, and the city itself had multiple public and private collections. The library of Caliph al-Hakam II in the 10th century was legendary, reportedly containing hundreds of thousands of volumes. Some accounts claim as many as 400,000, though exact numbers are debated. Regardless of the precise figure, it was undoubtedly one of the largest libraries in the world at the time, dwarfing any collection in Christian Europe. This immense collection covered every field of knowledge: philosophy, medicine, astronomy, mathematics, botany, history, geography, poetry, and theology. Scribes and illuminators worked tirelessly to copy and preserve these texts, ensuring their availability to a hungry scholarly community. The Great Mosque of Cordoba, beyond its architectural splendor, served as a vibrant teaching center. Scholars would hold classes in its courtyards and porticos, attracting students from across Andalus, North Africa, and even Christian Europe. Córdoba was a melting pot of intellectual ideas, fostering an environment where different schools of thought could coexist and interact. This intellectual dynamism led to ground-draining discoveries and influential philosophical debates. Córdoba produced an extraordinary roster of intellectual giants whose works shaped not just Islamic thought, but influenced the trajectory of Western civilization. Among them was Ibn Rushd, known in the West as Averroes, a towering figure of the 12th century. He was a brilliant philosopher, physician, astronomer, and jurist whose commentaries on Aristotle profoundly influenced medieval scholasticism. His emphasis on the importance of reason and logic in interpreting religious texts sparked vigorous debates across Europe. Another incredible figure was Abu al-Qasim al-Zahrawi, or Abul Qasis, a 10th century physician and surgeon. His monumental medical encyclopedia, Al-Tazraf, was a comprehensive 30-volume work on medical practice. It included detailed descriptions of surgical instruments and procedures, many of which he invented or refined. His work on surgical techniques, including the use of ligatures for blood vessels and techniques for removing bladder stones, was translated into Latin and became the standard surgical textbook in Europe for 5 centuries. Imagine a single book from Córdoba guiding surgical practices for half a millennium. Córdoba was also home to brilliant Jewish scholars like Moses Maimonides, who, though he lived in Cairo for a significant part of his life, hailed from Córdoba. His philosophical work, The Guide for the Perplexed, sought to reconcile Aristotelian philosophy with Jewish theology, a project that mirrored the broader intellectual currents of Al-Andalus. The city also fostered pioneering botanists like Ibn al-Baitar, who documented thousands of medicinal plants and their uses, and poets like Ibn Ham, whose treatise on love, The Dove's Neck Ring, remains a masterpiece of Arabic literature. The intellectual zenith of Córdoba eventually receded due to political fragmentation and Christian reconquest. However, its legacy as a center of learning remains profound, even if its full intellectual breadth is sometimes overshadowed by later European developments. Córdoba was a place where intellectual curiosity knew no bounds, where different faiths contributed to a shared intellectual tapestry, and where the pursuit of knowledge was integrated into the very fabric of urban life. It was a beacon of enlightenment, a city that did not merely collect knowledge but actively generated it, pushing the frontiers of human understanding and leaving an indelible mark on the course of history, a true luminary of thought that forever changed the world. Number 1. Baghdad, the House of Wisdom and beyond. When people mention the Islamic Golden Age, one name immediately springs to mind. Baghdad, the city founded by Abbasid Caliph al-Mansur in 762 CE, quickly became the sprawling, beating heart of the Islamic Empire, a monumental testament to ambition, power, and perhaps most famously, knowledge. Its most iconic institution, the House of Wisdom, or Beit al-Hikmah, is widely celebrated. However, the true depth and breadth of Baghdad's intellectual life extended far beyond just this one institution, encompassing a vast network of libraries, observatories, hospitals, and informal salons that made it the undisputed intellectual capital of the world for centuries. This sprawling intellectual ecosystem, often simplified to just the House of Wisdom, represents a forgotten scale of knowledge production. The House of Wisdom, established primarily under Caliph Harun al-Rashid and greatly expanded by his son al-Mamun in the early 9th century, was indeed a groundbreaking institution. It was not merely a library, though its collection of manuscripts from across the Greek, Persian, and Indian worlds was immense. It was a research academy, a translation bureau, and an observatory rolled into one. Here, scholars from diverse backgrounds, Muslim, Christian, and Jewish, worked side by side, translating ancient texts from Greek, Syriac, Pahlavi, and Sanskrit into Arabic. This massive translation movement was unprecedented in history, systematically preserving and making accessible the scientific and philosophical heritage of antiquity. Imagine teams of translators meticulously poring over fragile scrolls, unlocking centuries of knowledge for a new generation. But Baghdad's intellectual prowess was far from limited to translation. The city was a hotbed of original research and innovation. It was in Baghdad that Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi, a brilliant mathematician and astronomer, developed the discipline of algebra in the 9th century. His book, Al-Kitab al-Mukhtasar, fi Hisab al-Jabr wal-Muqabala, provided systematic solutions for linear and quadratic equations, giving the world the very word algebra. He also introduced Hindu-Arabic numerals, including the concept of zero to the Islamic world and subsequently to Europe, revolutionizing mathematics and commerce. Without al-Khwarizmi, the numerical system we use today might never have spread as it did. Another towering figure was Abu Bakr Muhammad ibn Zakaria al-Razi, known in the West as Razis, a physician and alchemist of the 9th and 10th centuries. He managed the main hospital in Baghdad and conducted pioneering medical research. His comprehensive medical encyclopedia, Al-Hawi, or the Comprehensive Book, documented clinical cases and discussed the theories of ancient Greek and Indian physicians, along with his own critical observations. He was the first to differentiate between measles and smallpox, providing accurate clinical descriptions of both diseases. His work was based on empirical observation and careful experimentation, reflecting a remarkably modern scientific approach. Baghdad's hospitals, or Bamaristans, were advanced medical centers that offered free treatment to patients, conducted medical training, and served as research institutions. They were far ahead of their time, combining treatment with education and systematic inquiry. The city also boasted multiple astronomical observatories, not just within the House of Wisdom, where astronomers like Yahya ibn Abi Mansur meticulously observed celestial bodies, corrected existing astronomical tables. The Banu Musa brothers, 9th century polymaths, were not only patrons of the House of Wisdom, but also brilliant engineers and mathematicians. Their Kitab al-Hiyal, or Book of Ingenious Devices, described over 100 mechanical devices, many of which were automated, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of mechanics, pneumatics, and hydraulics that was centuries ahead of its time. These inventions ranged from elaborate fountains to complex automated musical instruments, promoting an incredible fusion of scientific theory and practical application. Beyond these grand institutions, Baghdad's intellectual vibrancy stemmed from its diverse and dynamic social fabric. The city was home to numerous informal intellectual salons or majalis, where scholars, poets, and philosophers would gather in private homes, mosques, or even marketplaces to debate, recite poetry, and share ideas. These discussions were often rigorous, sometimes heated, but always intellectually stimulating, fostering a climate of open inquiry and critical thinking. Various schools of thought, from the rationalist Mutazilites to the early Sufi mystics and the different schools of Islamic law, engaged in vibrant intellectual discourse, pushing the boundaries of theological and philosophical understanding. The sheer scale of Baghdad's intellectual output, the diversity of its scholarly pursuits, and the interdisciplinary nature of its institutions are often simplified to just the House of Wisdom. But Baghdad was a city where knowledge was not just stored. Its urban infrastructure, its vast markets, its political stability for much of the period, and its unparalleled patronage for scholars made it an intellectual magnet. While the Mongol invasion in 1258 severely impacted the city, it had already laid the foundational stones for much of modern science, medicine, and mathematics. Baghdad was not merely a center of learning. It was a veritable engine of human ingenuity, a place where the pursuit of knowledge reached unparalleled heights, forever shaping the trajectory of human civilization. Its true intellectual breadth remains an inspiring yet often underestimated chapter in history.